everyone, and welcome to the Dartmouth Energy Collaborative Energy Seminar Series. Today, we're talking about building a sustainable, resilient future, perspectives on building and energy. We're gonna start off here right on time. I think people will probably continue to trickle in over the next 5 to 10 minutes, but best to use our time effectively. My name is Rosi Kerr, and I'm Dartmouth's Director of Sustainability. And last week, for those of you who were able to join us, we talked a little bit about, first of all, I apologize for my scratchy voice. I have a little bit of a cold, not COVID, but a little bit of a cold. So apologize in advance for that. Last week, for those of you that were able to join us, we talked about Dartmouth's built infrastructure and how we're thinking about sustainability on our college campus. One of the things I may have mentioned last week is as we think about campuses, within Dartmouth, we're kind of this tiny little corner of the world. Sure, we're $1 billion company, but on the global stage, our 5.5 million square feet is really small. However, colleges and universities as a sector of society are responsible for something like 4 or 5% of GDP and a huge number of square feet. And today we are joined by 3 of my colleagues from around the country who are working on making their campuses more sustainable. And one of the things that we think about together is how do we make that section of GDP, that whole sector of colleges and universities, more sustainable? Not only do we control that 4 or 5.5% of GDP, we also are producing students who will disproportionately control the future of our country and the future of the world. So I am very, very pleased today to be joined by colleagues who I admire from around the country. We are joined today by Shawn from Georgia Tech, by Shana from Princeton, and Dano from Smith. Each of these people have accomplished an enormous amount on their own campuses. And we're going to start today with Shawn, then we're going to go to Shana, then we're going to go to Dano. On Georgia Tech's campus, Shawn has accomplished something miraculous, which is to build one of, I think, 28 living building challenge buildings, and the most sustainable classroom in the country, probably one of the most or the most in the world, depending on how you define that. And the question they're asking at Georgia Tech is, how do we not just build a building that is less bad? How do we build a building that is good, right? A building that actually contributes to its campus, to its ecosystem, and to the world. Shana and I have been working on sustainability for a long time. And Shana is working on Princeton's campus, where they have a 2046 net zero carbon goal and a 73% carbon reduction goal by 2026. And Princeton, like Dartmouth, has a disproportionate impact on the world. They've also made something that I think is pretty important, which is a $50 million commitment to improving their existing building stock. And they are looking at things like an integrative design process in capital projects. So Shana is going to bring into the conversation, how do we think about ambitious goals at a campus scale? At Smith, Dano has also had incredible accomplishments. They have a more ambitious carbon neutrality goal, and a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030, integrating ground source heat exchange, off-campus solar, and offsets to do it. Smith is a really interesting campus to me because they've brought together their campus as an operational unit, but also their curriculum, and they have a really, incredible, in my mind, integration of those two things, with Smith students working across the curriculum and also across the campus in terms of how they're thinking about integrating students into the process. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it to Shawn. Each person is going to introduce themselves a little bit and how they got into this mess, I hope. I'll turn it to Shawn, and we'll spend 5 or 6 minutes with him, and then to Shana, and then to Dano. Then I'm going to ask them a series of questions, and then we'll turn to your questions today. So Shawn, I pass it off to you.
Thank you so much. My name is Shan Arora. I'm the director, or as I like to say, the humble servant of the Candida Building for Innovative Sustainable Design. My background is actually a little strange for what I'm doing right now. I'm an international trade, international tax attorney by my first 10 years of professional life, but that's obviously not where my passion was. So in 2010, I got the opportunity to align my passion with my profession, and I made a transition into the world of the built environment at a nonprofit here in Atlanta called South Face. It's probably one of the preeminent nonprofits that deals with the built environment. And very quickly, I just got into energy and became well-versed in energy issues, but also got an opportunity to understand a lot of built environment issues. And 3.5 years now that I've been here. And I appreciate, Rosie, the introduction, but I did not have much to do with the creation of this building. We like to say it takes a village to raise a living building, and that certainly was one of the last people to come on board of this project, in fact. But as the director, one of my main tasks is to make sure this is not a unicorn, it's not a one-off, that this building fulfills its mission, which is to be a change agent for our campus and the region. It is a multidisciplinary class lab, that's what it is. 37,000 square feet indoors, 10,000 square feet outdoors. We want the full spectrum of Georgia Tech undergraduates to come through the building, have classes in the building. And it was 100% donor funded. You know, it's a 100% donor funded building because as the first of its type, there are risks, and we wanted to be able to take those risks and create something that folks can touch, feel, see, again, to have it be replicable. I'm going to just highlight a few things that hopefully get the discussion going. And one is net positive energy. The whole reason the Kendeda building exists in the South is to dispel the myth, the misnotion that you cannot have a net positive energy building in the hot, humid South. You can, in fact, have a net positive building in the hot, humid South. We are 225% net positive during our 12-month performance period. The goal is 105. So put another way, the energy efficiency features of the building, the energy efficient systems coupled with this solar canopy produce enough electricity to power the building. Its twin that does not have solar and still has 25% left to go to the grid. Net positive water, what does that mean? The building acts like a forest in that 100% of the average rainfall stays and gets managed on site. It was actually designed for 90%, but it's been so well designed that it's 100%. So rain falls on this road and is immediately turned into stormwater, because this is single-use infrastructure that is designed to take an asset, rainfall, and turn it into a nuisance that has to be paid for by taxpayers or borne by downstream communities whose properties get inundated. Compare that with the site of the Living Building Challenge, where all the water that falls via rain is managed here through bioswales, pervious surfaces, etc. Our gray water is treated over here in the constructed wetland, and we have composting toilets. Our sewage stays on site. We treat it on site. This building has no water impact for the broader community whatsoever. During the construction process, this building diverted more waste from the landfill than is sent to the landfill. We did that by reusing over 99.9% of the waste that was produced by the building. First of all, we minimized the waste, and then we reused the waste. For example, the wood that makes up these stairs actually is the end caps of the 12-foot beams that you see. In a normal construction project, that would have been thrown away. This is recycled material. In fact, there's recycled material, repurposed, salvaged material throughout the building. So in that way, we diverted more waste from the landfill than we sent to the landfill. 40% of American landfills is construction and demolition debris. We didn't add to that problem. And then finally, what we can showcase through this building in our particular political climate is that around you are solutions to carbon. And what you might not know is Georgia's the #1 timber industry in the country. And we all know that timber, if grown properly, trees grown properly, store carbon. So when folks walk into the Candida building, what they're seeing is part of the carbon solution. And that helps immensely to get people out of the conversation that currently exists where things are environment or ecology. So yes, spoken to 10,000 people in person, virtual, if not more. Another thousands and thousands of folks have come through the building for classes and conferences, and everybody leaves inspired. Everybody leaves with their imagination ignited. But how can we take that inspiration and excitement and turn it to action? What I have found in the 2 years that this building is open, that converting that excitement to action is extremely difficult. And I think that's because the pain points aren't painful enough yet. In our region, we have both chronic and acute rain caused flooding. We have a lot of rain right now, and I'm constantly getting warnings of flash floods. And here we have composting toilets. Without a doubt, the president of this university's most favorite feature. Folks come into this building and say, I've heard about your composting toilets. Let me see the composting toilets. Everybody gets it. This is where our poo and pee ends up. This is where we compost it and use it as a nutrient and not turn it into sewage. Everybody understands why this is important for our region, yet very little action. And I think it's because we don't have a mechanism that internalizes the externalities of us enjoying our buildings. There's no mechanism. We did it because the goal of this building was twofold: be a multidisciplinary classroom, class lab, certified living building. Those two things were non-negotiable. Everything else that didn't take us to those two goals was value engineered out. So how many sustainable projects begin their life with a, let's just say, LEED Platinum goal, but it's not a mandate, it's a goal. And then all the sustainability stuff gets value engineered out. So what is the mechanism? Like our mechanism was non-negotiable. It was in a contract. We have to be Living Building Challenge certified. What's the mechanism that makes sustainability non-negotiable? And that's what I'm really working through right now as the director that's charged with making this replicable. We'll save some more for, and as always is the case, by the way, whether it's in person or virtual, our conversations finish right here next to the poo and pee. Because it's a conversation we should be having. And one thing I've also learned is, regardless of whether you're the president of the United States of America or me, everyone goes to the bathroom. So it's something that is relatable. Everyone can relate to this.
That is a true story. So with that sort of granular kickoff, starting with the pee and the poo, let's shift over to you, Shana, to talk a little bit more about on a campus scale, how are you thinking particularly about your carbon transition, but also, you know, Sean's talking about the individual building and how hard it is to kind of swim upstream in the individual building. How are you thinking about that on a broader scale?
Thank you. And thanks for that tour, Sean, of the facility. Yeah, so how do you get what Sean was sort of illustrating there? How do you think about every facility achieving some similar level of performance across an entire campus? And this has been a challenge at Princeton, given the extent of development happening right now. So the current capital plan at Princeton is very extensive. So the charge was, how do we stay coordinated, and how do we think about all of these projects moving us towards our vision of being a carbon neutral campus? And I don't say that flippantly either, because carbon neutrality can mean a lot of things. What we're trying to do is get away from the combustion of fossil fuels, period. So how do we transition our campus, and how does every building project and renovation contribute to that? So I'd say we had to develop new process and new ways of building integrative design thinking, both at the full campus scale, and then how to translate that to each individual project. What are the opportunities at each project? What can we really leverage? And the other factor is, Rosi mentioned that we have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2046, but we're in the middle of a study to figure out how to accelerate that. The reality of accelerating being a fossil-free campus means it's all about infrastructure. So in our case, much like Smith, we're transitioning to heating hot water and geoexchange from a natural gas cogen plant that's steam, that delivers heat via steam, and chilled water. So we're going to convert the whole campus away from that system over to an electric-driven ground source heat pump system. Accelerating that is massively disruptive, because we were going to take 20 plus years to do it, and now we're studying how do we do it in 10. But that's really the only way. Getting away from the direct combustion of fossil fuels as a campus is the only way to demonstrate truly demonstrating what's required to solve the problem we're in societally, or mitigate it. So so that's where we are right now, is really working through the first. You start with the vision, right? What is it that we can do as a campus to demonstrate what's needed for the world, or the type of problem solving that's useful for others in this whole endeavor? And then how does that translate into on the ground, like real time, real stuff, like real engineering, real planning? And then how do you get people excited about that journey, because it's disruptive? So I'm just going to share one image to show you what sustainability in this context actually looks like right now. So, I mean, this is a photo of a drill rig. There's nothing sexy about this unless unless you love toys like this. But this is what the infrastructure transition actually looks like. At least in the sort of geoexchange well drilling arena, which is really promising for many parts of the country. So this is not attractive. This is disruptive. It's noisy. It's messy. So one of the things that we're really excited about right now is how do we acknowledge the disruption, but also build enthusiasm and pride in the vision behind it? Because we need people's hearts and minds in it. We need everyone in and willing to put up with some discomfort in the meantime, especially if you're thinking about things at scale, like whole campus scale, whole district kind of infrastructure changes over an accelerated timeline. The other thing that I want to share really quickly is a concept that we practice in all of our decision making. And it's simply this. You know, this is a very simple concept, right? But if you think about all the decisions you make in the context of how that action can scale, it really shifts the way you do planning. So I'll give you one example, one specific example. So we have capital projects. We have this infrastructure conversion activity. We have a bunch of capital buildings going up. How can we use each building as a lever for broader scales of impact? And it gets down to, in some cases, you can think about it about materials. So take concrete, for example. A huge driver in global climate change, the concrete industry around the world. So what can we do with each one of our projects to bolster research and development in our region with the concrete providers? So if they're not already producing lower embodied carbon concrete or low carbon concrete, how do we help them? How do we partner with them to get there, with our researchers providing input as well? So we have researchers who are demonstrating what that looks like at the laboratory scale. And we have the concrete industry not reaching that level of performance yet. So how can we be partners and use our contracts to incentivize the regional industry to move faster? That's just one example of the potential of leveraging our decisions across different scales. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Shauna. I just want to thank Rosie and the Irving Institute for the invitation today. Really happy to be here. And I'm going to share a couple of slides. And the first of these is set up.
It is. It's a little off center for some. Maybe that's just on me because I have gallery view. There you go. Perfect.
This is not explicitly about energy. This is about organizational identity and context. We have deep technical problems, and we actually have technical solutions for those. I think Shawn's living building is an example. Smith is home to the world's fifth living building. We learned a lot from that building, and we're continued to not build buildings like that. So why not? And so I think there's something really important about how we connect our technical problems to the things that are also, which is the energy systems and energy services are enabling functions of institutions. They're not the meaning or the sense or the reason for the institutions. And so we have to pay attention to the meaning and the sense and the reason of the institution in order to make changes to the enabling and the infrastructure. And we have to tie those things together. So Smith College was founded in 1871. Since almost the beginning, we've had a botanic garden. And we've been connecting, and Smith admits women and educates people who identify across a range of gender identity, but we have a long history of connecting women to natural systems. And that goes all the way back to the 1800s. These are very elite women, undoubtedly, who were being, through our botanic gardens, connected into the world of plants. We're very, very different today, an extremely diverse group of students who come together. And so we need to be thinking about that history in that context. So let me just talk a little bit about that, because as Shauna said, we have a technical problem, and our technical problem is if we want to decarbonize our institution, our plan is very similar to Princeton's. I often say Princeton and Smith are remarkably similar, except Princeton is 10 times larger on all metrics. And so our system is very similar to what Shauna described. We would convert our distribution from steam distribution. We have a district that heats all the buildings on campus. We have about 100 buildings. We would convert that to lower temperature, lower grade, lower quality heat energy. We would convert our buildings to be compatible with that lower temperature hot water, and we would create a source by converting fossil fuel boilers to ground source heat exchange, air source heat exchange, maybe even sewer source heat exchange, to be thinking about where we get that low grade heat from. So that's the technical problem. We actually know how to do this, right? This is technology and money, but we can make this conversion. So what stands in the way? Well, there's a number of things. And one of the things we have to think about is mission activities. And how do we join to mission activities? Because the disruption that Shana was talking about is the disruption to mission. When we interrupt classrooms, when we interrupt dormitories, when we interrupt research, we're interrupting the mission activities of the institution. So one of the ways to think about that is to integrate those mission activities with the technical problem. So on the right, Shana had her drill rig, I have my drill rig. We drilled a 1,000-foot test bore on our campus to have a deeper investigation of sort of the geophysical properties of the ground under our campus to understand better what the cost and technology dynamics were for a ground source heat exchange. What we discovered was on the left is Bob Newton, a professor of geosciences. We drilled a 1,000-foot hole. It went artesian, so the water was coming up out of the hole, as was a lot of carbon dioxide gas, which was geologically completely unexpected. So we were able to have Bob and some of his colleagues down there taking samples and investigating why this was. They are now fully engaged in that geophysical work. We had an engineering faculty member who put a fiber optic cable all the way down 1,000 feet so that we can watch the temperature gradient of that well. This is two of our engineering students who actually are holding the cable in their hands. Robin on the right is doing an engineering honors thesis where she is looking at the temperature along that cable, since that well has been attached to a ground source heat exchange system that's attached to the building behind Bob. So we are actually looking at that as we load that well for this building. We're not only understanding the geophysical properties of the ground, we're understanding that in our context in a loaded well here on our campus, and that's turning into curricular work for students. The other thing that's really important to Smith is, like many institutions, we're really, really interested in our own history. And it's a very important cultural dynamic. This is a 1946 photograph of the steam system going in on our campus. It was very work intensive. It was very disruptive. This is probably far more disruptive than anything we would contemplate today. But when we think about how do we take the history, how do we take the disruption, how do we take the curricular work and the research and pull that all together? This is an example of a project we did. On the lower left, there's two students, Maya and Jess, and they did a project, a research project, where they went back and looked at the 1946 trustee authorization to build the original district energy system. They found out two things. One, it was really expensive, and they cost escalated that to $2019 to sort of give us a comparative point for what we might invest today. So they did a quantitative and economic assessment. But when they were going through the trustees' minutes, they also found that while the trustees went to this system in 1947 for a very solid business case, which was bringing in coal by rail car was going to be cheaper than bringing it in by truck, they also discovered that in the trustees' minutes, it said, we want to eliminate the trucking of fuel and ashes through campus property, and we want to eliminate smoke from separate plants and reduce dirt in buildings. So there was in 1946 a pollution reason to transform our district energy system, which was completely enlightening in terms of thinking about the organizational change that we're going through today. So this is just another way that we think about bringing the mission activities, the deep identity of our institution to bear on what is otherwise a technical problem. So there it is, super easily done.
Ah, yes, super easily done. That's a great pivot into some of my questions. I think maybe starting off, when we're getting, if you have a question in the audience, please feel free to type it in the Q&A, and I'm gonna toggle back and forth between questions I have and questions you have. But starting things off, I think all of you have talked about barriers, things that are keeping us from doing this as quickly as we'd like. I think Shawn, you talked about points of pain and how, you built this amazing building, but it's not like everyone then, everyone comes, looks at it, says, this is so cool, but they don't go off and build their own. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, if you were ruler of the world right now, what would be the mechanism that you would use to bring that point of pain into the math that makes people decide what kind of building they're going to build, right? Like, how would you change that equation? And if you could talk about that for a minute or two, maybe with an energy lens, using that maybe as the lens.
I think, because where I am, I say, meaning I'm in the South, I say the best solution is the conservative solution. It is the conservative economic solution known as a carbon tax. Because, and then it's a carbon tax that's levied across the least number of entities as possible to minimize the government footprint, touch points. It's just not an original thought that I'm having. I mean, there's lots of versions of cap and trade and carbon and tariff, but
so you would advocate using a carbon tax to drive the cost of carbon into building prices so that people are building differently, or into energy math so that people are deciding differently.
Right, and it gets to vehicle miles traveled. It gets to all that stuff. So the Living Building Challenge has a requirement that 50% of the materials in a building have to be sourced within 1,000 kilometers. There's multiple reasons for that. It's to keep money local, and it's to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Absent that requirement, what incentive does any other building have to source materials close to the site purely from a carbon reduction perspective? None.
Right.
A carbon tax does that. I mean, now granted, we could somehow get to carbon-free transportation, which then expands that supply chain. But to me, from an energy perspective, a carbon tax ends up hitting that tax and becomes embodied. It's an embodied tax. And the market's goal is to reduce the amount of tax embodied in the economy.
So that's a great pivot to talk about. Shana, we've talked about this before, but Princeton has experimented with an internal cost of carbon. So, I think, Shawn, in our fantasy world, as people that work on sustainability and care about this, we might hope that a carbon cost or carbon tax or some form of carbon regulation is imposed upon us so that the costing of option A versus option B, more sustainable building versus less sustainable building, is made more level. Absent that, Shana, you guys have experimented with an internal cost of carbon at Princeton. Could you talk a little bit about that experiment and how it's gone and the extent to which it has impacted or not impacted decision making?
Yeah. So, Shawn is right that the realities of the way we do our calculations associated with building projects, to figure out where to invest money and where not to. The reality is that we're dealing with life cycle costing analyses and paybacks and all of these economic mechanisms that are part of the decision-making matrix. It's not everything, but it's a strong factor, for executive leadership. So if every sustainability related project or system that you propose for a building gets cranked through the standard economic analysis, the paybacks look terrible a lot of the time. So the idea of having an internal or proxy carbon price to value that in the economic analysis is really, really useful. So that said, we've applied the equivalent of a $45 per metric ton internal carbon price in our life cycle costing analyses for the past 10 years. There's two things I'll share. One is that number, that particular value, $45, hardly ever directly influenced the decision. It wasn't
because the cost is too low.
Cost is too low. The cost of doing business in New Jersey is very, very high. The cost of energy is very, very low. So on the flip side of that, however, it made us have conversations that were far more nuanced, even though directly you couldn't point to it and say, oh, because we had $45 carbon price, it shifted this decision. It did that once in 10 years, but it still influenced the design discussion in really meaningful ways. Now, so lots of lessons learned from that. So now we're at a point of updating our internal carbon price, and as everyone knows, coming up with a methodology to escalate that cost significantly is challenging because there is no standard methodology. So we're just now working through approval processes for a new methodology to establish a much higher proxy carbon price that we think will level the playing field better, more effectively.
So Dano, you talked a little bit about the role of culture and the role of humans. And I think, we've talked a lot as colleagues over the years about the fact that, we work on some of these very tangible technical projects, tons of carbon into the atmosphere, drill rigs into the ground. And yet what we actually are is human decision making change agents, we hope, right? So could you talk a little bit about maybe the non-quantitative reasons that people do or don't make decisions in favor of a lower carbon future?
Sure. I mean, I think we have, like Princeton, we also have a proxy carbon price. It's around $75. We've done extensive life cycle costing on our transformation of our district energy system. But we've also, we try and throw all the things at the challenge and at the business case for this. And some of those are non-quantitative. I think one of the things is the institution is always deeply concerned about the trade-offs. If you're going to invest, there's only so much money we can spend. And the question is, are you spending it? If you only had one thing to spend it on, would it be energy, or would it be something that was much more directly mission enabling? And it's hard for trustees and institutions to make those decisions. And so we also talk a lot about the ways in which this is mission enabling. We believe that low temperature hot water as a way to distribute energy on our campus is actually much more flexible and resilient in the future. You can get low quality heat from a lot more sources than steam. You can only get steam by burning stuff. You can get low quality hot water from waste heat, from solar thermal, from heat extraction from the earth, from the air. You can do it in a lot of
servers.
Yeah, there's just like a million places to get low quality heat. So that's one thing that sort of helps us think about how does this set us up? How does this future-proof the organization? The other one is, in order to have a balanced system on our campus, we need to add cooling. if we add more cooling on our campus, that means we open up the amount of time that we can use our facilities during the year, right? We're an inefficient institution because we're mostly a school year institution. And that's, increasingly a problem because our dormitories are not air conditioned. So this enables a way to, in a carbon neutral way, actually improve quality of space conditioning across campus, which will enable us to change the way we think about how we program our campus in the future. So those are some other ways to think about it.
One of the things that's kind of come up in the chat a little bit is this idea of kind of squeezing one, the balloon in one spot and having it bulge somewhere else, so that, we shift to more electricity. How are we getting that electricity? And I think this relates to a question that the four of us talked to in our prep call around how our campuses fit into our communities and how they might effectively drive positive change or not in our communities. And I don't know, Shawn, maybe you could talk a little bit about the extent to which the building has done that. And maybe, Dano and Shana, you guys can weigh in on how you're thinking about this context of place. I think our universities have mixed histories about, when it comes to positively interacting with the places in which they are situated in ways that derive benefit, not just for the university or the stakeholders of the university, but for the community at large. So I don't know if you can, maybe Shawn, starting with you, and then we can see where we get on that question.
Well, if I was to think about how this building benefits the community at large, like outside of the campus, I would have to say it's consideration of water. And that actually has a carbon component too. That's interesting. Atlanta has combined stormwater sewer. That means every time it rains, rainfall turns into stormwater and it goes into a drain. Increasingly, our wastewater systems are being inundated with stormwater. As we pave more of our cities, we have more impervious surface. When our wastewater systems overflow, we're dumping sewage, and that's an environmental problem, and it's an environmental justice problem as well, or equity downstream problem, because the communities downstream now have to go through more effort to clean the water, to bring it up to drinking standards. And so the fact that we're not contributing to that equity issue by having runoff that inundates downstream communities, that's a problem here as well. We've had to condemn homes that have had our sewage, the city's sewage, end up in their basements, reducing the taxpayer burden. But what's also lost on this is that currently most people go to the bathroom in drinking water. And in our region, all the electricity it takes to bring drinking water, rainwater, to drinking water standards that we then just go to the bathroom in, most of that electricity is made through burning fossil fuels. And it's this water relationship with the community and the carbon pollution baked into the water that we flush down the toilet. That's a global carbon issue, global change. This is really resonating. It's like this hyper local global thing, and it's all around water.
And that's a great example. I don't know, Shana or Dano, if you guys want to weigh in on that kind of local connection, or not kind of squeezing the balloon in one place to drive that somewhere else.
I think we think about this a lot in terms of energy. On our living building, it's the energy production is right on the site of the building. We probably have 4 or 5 more buildings that I would call net zero ready, that are sort of that. Their use is about the size you could probably produce enough electricity on site. but what about the other 95 buildings? You know, we don't actually, there's not enough money in the system to be renovating all of those to sort of a net zero ready condition. So we really do need to think about the whole campus, and how do we take the campus to net zero is going to mean offsite energy solutions. And those offsite energy solutions are not yet perfect. You know, we spent a lot of time sourcing. We ended up in a collaboration with Williams, Amherst, Hampshire, and Bowdoin College, sourcing solar from a large offsite facility. We made sure that it was in New England. We wanted to be able to point to it. We wanted it to be a new additional asset on the grid. But it's opening this month. It's a large solar facility in Maine. We're super proud of that, and we simultaneously acknowledge that that kind of large industrial solar facility is not a super perfect solution, but it's the solution that we could have now and takes us in the right direction. So I think that the local, the on-site, the off-site, the community, the region, right? We need to be sort of working towards localizing, but there are significant challenges.
I think an important thing that you brought up there, Dano, which I think our whole field is starting to do a better job of grappling with, is kind of courageous transparency as we do we all wish that there was a magical silver bullet for the problem of climate change, for the problem of carbon, for the problem of how do you transform these campuses that have, Dartmouth, like all of your campuses, has layers of infrastructure going back 250 years, right? And it's very difficult to flip a switch and make all of that carbon neutral tomorrow, as much as we might wish we could. So I wonder, if the direction we need to head is just towards more honesty and accountability, even though, we know that there is no perfect solution. So I don't know, Shana, if you want to comment as well on that contextual change making.
Yeah, I actually like what you just said a lot, Rosie. And in addition to everything that Shawn and Dano have said, I'm thinking a lot about exactly that. So just as a tangible example, every year we give an update on our sustainability progress or challenges to our trustees. But nowhere in the past, nowhere in that presentation were there any explicit links with community impacts or environmental justice considerations. So for example, when we report on our greenhouse gas emissions from our central plant, we report on that, but we don't report on particulates. As part of that presentation, the particulate reporting goes somewhere else because it's a compliance issue. So one of the things that I think about, which is something I think our whole field is grappling with, is how do we actually communicate more completely and honestly through our reporting to tell the whole story about how our decisions are impacting communities. So it's something, if you have a central plant right now, it's as simple as understanding wind direction, particulate emissions, and which communities are downwind. Are they identified environmental justice communities? Are they not? Are they overburdened by all kinds of other types of pollutants at low levels? So I think asking those questions is long past due and should be part of how we report our progress.
It also enables us to look at our alternatives with a more clear-eyed lens. So this is the thing that we've struggled with at Dartmouth, that people accept the status quo as kind of almost as if it's zero impact, which of course it is not, right? Dartmouth has a central heating plant, just like Smith and Princeton, and we're emitting stuff, right? But we've lived with that for 200 years or whatever, 120 years. So we're kind of like, oh, that's just what it is. But when we consider alternatives, we don't accurately measure the impact of what we're doing now. Where is that number 6 fuel oil we're burning coming from, and what are the impacts of that supply chain? So that's an interesting decision. I think we got a question in the chat around how do we convince the administrations at our schools to take the issue of climate change more seriously. Jordan, great question. This is what we spend our days and nights thinking about, right? As sustainability professionals, this is what we're trying to do. I think the question I'd love you all to answer, to leave our audience with, is what do you see as the big opportunities for colleges and universities when it comes to the transformation to a just low carbon economy or zero carbon future economy? What do you see as our unique opportunity set, and how do you see us stepping into that opportunity set?
I'll start. The word that comes to mind that I think is so unique for higher ed is demonstration. The power of convening and the power of demonstration. I think that higher ed is exceptionally good at that. So when you have these campuses that convene thinkers and practitioners from around the world to talk about issues, and you have a demonstration site that you can point policymakers towards and say, hey, come look at our thing and see how it actually works. And municipal leaders come and look at demonstrations. Other college campuses come. We all tour each other's campuses. Like the value of demonstration, I think, cannot be underemphasized in the role that we play in this big endeavor.
I think institutes of higher learning are mission oriented. I mean, that's in our DNA. So we're supposed to be the incubators of the solutions for tomorrow. And I think increasingly leaders of these institutes of higher learning are taking climate change seriously. But it's a gradient of seriousness. There's always going to be an emergency that supersedes that. If you take a look at political polls, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, vast majority of Americans say that they are concerned about the environment. But even those of us who list it as near the top, we're not issue voters on that. We're not issue consumers on that. We're not issue anything on that, because most of us will have more proximate concerns. I joke that it's only when rivers are catching on fire that people are like, whoa, maybe I should take environmental regulation seriously. And now we do have a world that's on fire. So what Dano said, where we also have the ability of turning the disruption and the cost into an opportunity for training and teaching. But it takes a lot of coordination to take an institution and retool it around the central mission. And especially when you have so many competing priorities. But I do think you're right. We are ideally suited to be the template that guides our region to the transition. Our unique regions, I should say.
I think that your idea of radical transparency, Rosie, it sort of points to the notion that our institutions are full of dilemmas, right? Some of those dilemmas are in our supply chain, they're in our waste chain, they're in our operations, and all of those dilemmas are proxy for what happens beyond our institutions. And we have, Smith is largely an undergraduate institution. And so we are, in addition to being a demonstration, we're also trying to figure out how to teach students to be effective change agents. I think many of our students see advocacy as the sole and only way to be change agents. And there's so many other ways. They can be internal change agents. They can do it through economics or business, or engineering or art or music. And so we're trying to help them, see those dilemmas on our campus as opportunities for making change and for deploying a wide variety of tools. And we want to teach them to use that wide variety of tools and techniques to go and have an impact out in the world. So that's sort of my perspective on that.
I think one of the things that comes up for me when I think about that issue of kind of radical transparency, or, trying to be really honest about the dilemmas we're facing, is we all face these dilemmas on a personal level, right? Like I think in sustainability and maybe in its parent or grandparent, whatever, environmentalism, right? We have this idea that we need to, that everyone's going to abandon, the comforts of modern society, that what we need is for everyone to get off grid or something along those lines. And that's not going to be an effective solution because, and, I'm speaking for myself here, I care about this issue a lot. I still live in a house that's heated, right? And I send children to schools that are heated, and I drive cars that are still largely dependent on fossil fuel. And so instead of trying to kind of to kind of throw everything under the bus, I think we have an obligation to get realistic about the quality of life that people are striving for. And yes, saying, how much is too much, and asking the hard questions around how many square feet does Dartmouth need per person? I think all of our institutions are sometimes building space when we do not need to build space. And, Dano, you talked about summer utilization versus winter utilization. If Dartmouth's classroom utilization rate is 35%, we have a lot of space before we need new buildings, new classrooms, right? So there's a lot of great questions that are hard and good questions to ask, but I think we also need to get honest about what we're striving for. And I think we are trying to create, a future where the 2 billion people that don't have access to energy have access to it, right? We're not trying to reduce access for the 7 billion that do, but we need to transform the access of the 5 billion that do and the 2 billion that don't, right? Mm-hmm. To get us to the appropriate number. So, I think there's a lot that colleges and universities can do to move that conversation forward into the mainstream and into the truly honest about the future we want. And it does involve bringing those issues of justice in. It does involve asking hard questions about how much is too much, which someone brought up in the chat. And it does also involve trying to figure out how to properly value what we care about. And, maybe carbon is one proxy for that, but also these intangibles that I think Dano did a really good job of talking about, of culture and place and community. Those intangibles are really important to us, right? Mm-hmm. And we tend to devalue them. So how do we figure out how to appropriately value them? If there's one thing I've learned during COVID, it's that we care about being in community and we miss it when we're not. And so, I see that as a potential great outcome to say, like, okay, well, then let's put a premium on that. Let's value that. And let's value the other things we care about, like carbon impact. So I, as always, when in the presence of greatness, of the three of you, am inspired. I think we all have a lot of work to do, but I hope that we've given you, the audience, an opportunity to see into some of that work. There have been a lot of great questions in the chat, most of which were answered. Thank you, Shana and Shawn, for rapid typing and answering a bunch of those questions. If people have other questions after this, please feel free to send them my way or to the Irving Institute to forward on to me. Shawn included a link to the living building that they built at Georgia Tech. And I just want to extend a huge thank you to my colleagues, Shawn, Shana, and Dano, for taking the time in what I know is a totally insane time of year to spend a little time at Dartmouth virtually.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Thank you all for joining us. And we will see you at the next talk, which is October 13th. And it sounds like the topic is, do environmental markets cause environmental injustice? Evidence from California's carbon market, which is a nice kind of leapfrog from talking about the internal price of carbon at our institutions. Please join us for the rest of the upcoming events. And there will be a whole nother slate coming in the winter. So we'll look forward to seeing you all at those. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.